of the G minor sonata for unaccompanied violin as a piece of architecture. You have these pillars, basic chords. A very simple harmonic framework, which are the weight-bearing organs. From this chord flows the following ornament, which leads to that chord, and from that flows the next ornament. And then...
Yeah, the symmetrical structure is one of the basic structures that you find in Bach's large-scale compositional planning, and it's clearly reflected in the architecture of his day.
I'm standing at one side of the Zwinger Pleasure Garden, which was built for the Elector of Saxony by a German architect named Pöppelmann. By looking at some of this architecture, you get a visual idea of what Bach's music was like. Because this is real German Baroque architecture, and Bach was the epitome of the German Baroque in music. Baroque art originally grew up in Italy at the end of the Renaissance, when the Renaissance style had grown very tired and rather effete, and some artists came along who wanted to do something fresh, something new that had power and vitality. The old Renaissance artists found it exceedingly ugly, and so they were the ones who coined the name Baroque, which comes from the word misshapen pearl. If you look at it from a distance, you begin to see a remarkable sense of proportion. The ornamentation is not plastered on from the outside, but it seems to grow from the inside of the very stones and columns themselves. This is exactly what Bach does in his music. His music is heavily ornamented. In fact, some of his critics in his day criticized him for what they called an excess of art. This is what they meant. But the proportions are beautiful. And in fact, if you wonder right now why you know about Bach, but you never heard of Pöppelmann, is a very simple answer. Bach did it much better. But it was not only in matters of music that Bach showed inspiration. While he was living in Weimar, his first 6 children were baptized, and 2 of them went on to make their father very proud as musicians. Wilhelm Friedemann was the first, and also Carl Philipp Emanuel, whom we call very unceremoniously C.P.E. Bach. But Johann Sebastian was not completely happy. He wanted total control over the musical scene wherever he worked. And as principal organist, he did not get it. And even as concertmaster, later on, a title which he was given, he still did not have it. What he wanted to be was Kapellmeister, in charge of all of the musical activities of the court. So you can understand that when he realized that he was going to be passed over for this particular role in Weimar, he looked elsewhere. Finding a Kapellmeister's post wasn't difficult. Getting permission to leave Weimar was. An attractive offer came from the tiny principality of Kärnten. Bach would have artistic freedom, a small orchestra, and an excellent salary. But like his father years before, Bach faced resistance. The Duke of Weimar not only refused to release him, but placed him under house arrest for nearly a month.
On November 6, 1717, the former concertmaster and organist Bach was confined to the county judge's place of detention for too stubbornly forcing the issue of his dismissal. And finally, on December 2nd, was freed from arrest with notice of his unfavorable discharge.
Real political power was held by a series of territorial princes, by free cities. We have Hamburg, and then particularly down in the southwest, a confusing medley of small states which we call free knighthoods. Sometimes these people only ruled over 2 or 3 square miles. Now, what this meant was that there was not much money for the arts, and if you had a lot of princes, the resources were spread extremely thinly. Weimar, where Bach spent some time as well, even in the 18th century, they were still using the same gowns that they used in one play to clothe all of their opera singers in the various productions that they made. The 17th century was an age when you really dressed for success. Your power, your authority was measured as much in how you looked as by your actual constitutional authority. Being in public with a sizable musical retinue was as much a measure of your power as your army. But the idea that power and authority in some way were connected with the way you entertained, the kind of household that you trotted out, the kind of musical establishment that you had, all this, I think, was a very important part of the structure of authority and prestige by which kings and princes and dukes and what have you maintained themselves in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Dukes of Württemberg spent 7% of the entire state budget on candles for the festive occasions that they had in the evening in which they impressed these people. So it was a good time for a musician. I mean, one can ask oneself the question, and I ask it of you, really, as a professional musician. Do you think Bach would have been any more creative if he had not worked for princes?
I don't think Bach could have been more creative than he was. Is it surprising that Bach was willing to leave the larger city of Weimar in order to become Kapellmeister in Kärnten?
No, for several reasons. The most obvious reasons is that it was not so wonderful where he was anymore, that he didn't have the conditions that he had, and that he was disappointed with that. And then the second is that he was really offered wonderful conditions to work with very good people in a field that he had not yet really explored and exploited. And the appeal of being able to have wonderful people to work with and write really instrumental music, which must have been a real challenge, because there you don't have the words to... the words, I think, were a great tool for Bach, a great tool. And for us interpreters, it also is, because we know what he meant when he read these words. And in instrumental music, you have only Bach expressing himself in music. So you have to really go and understand it deeper in a way. And I think he was challenged by these possibilities. He always took the opportunity that gave his genius another alley, you know, another opportunity really.